Hello again, grade 7s. In today's lesson, we are going to wrap up the unit of study on working it with data by talking about different measures of central tendency and then trying to identify which measures of central tendency best represent a set of data. Learning outcome for this lesson is to demonstrate an understanding of central tendency and range by determining the most appropriate measures of central tendency to report findings. All right, so what exactly is a measure of central tendency? A measure of central tendency is a single value that attempts to describe a data set. Well, what could that single value be? It turns out that we've already talked about different things that could be a measure of central tendency. A measure of central tendency could be the mean, it could be the median, or it could be the mode. In some situations, the mean is the best thing to represent the data. In other situations, the median best represents the data. And in other scenarios, the mode best represents the data. It just depends on the circumstance. And we'll look at some of those circumstances in example 1 in a moment. However, one way you can determine the best measure of central tendency is to look at which of these three is least affected by the inclusion of an outlier. We don't want outliers to have a significant influence on our data. So if we're trying to report data that's meaningful, we want to report the piece of information, the single thing that is least affected by that outlier. First example, I want to identify whether the mean, median, or mode is the best measure of central tendency in the following scenarios. For part A, I have the results from a poll conducted in the Calgary Mountain View area in 2019. So Calgary Mountain View is where our school is located. That was used to determine the next provincial government. So I have the NDP with 12,526 votes. I have the Liberal Party with 1,474 votes. And I have the United Conservative Party with 9,708 votes. I guess just a fun fact, the Alberta Party actually had more votes than the Liberal Party in this riding, although I chose to not include them on this table just because I feel as though people are more familiar with the NDP, Liberal, and the UCP, and I just wanted to simplify the results of the election. Okay, so based on this chart, what's the best measure of central tendency? Is it the median, the mode, or is it the mean? Well, think about this for a second. What is the objective of a poll or a survey? Usually in a poll or a survey, you provide a bunch of choices and you ask people to vote on it. So way back in the course, I used a survey where I asked people what their favorite soft drink was. And then I created a chart where I identified like what's the frequency for each choice. So the point of a poll is you provide choices and you want to figure out what's the most frequent choice. What measure of central tendency does that sound like for looking at the most frequent of something occurring? Well, that's the mode. So in a poll, what I want to know is the mode number of votes for whatever party we're looking at. So let's provide a justification for this. Say the objective of a poll is to determine the greatest frequency for a specific choice. So for example, here we're looking at the different parties. Okay, and which measure of central tendency is all about figuring out the greatest frequency? Well, it's the mode. So then I could say, therefore, the mode is the best measure of central tendency. And that would be the case in any poll or any survey, because in any poll or any survey, you're generally looking at, okay, what's the choice with the most frequent number of votes, which is the mode. B, I have a report of grades that were obtained on a math exam using our 4-point grading scale from 1 to 4. So 4 kids in the class got a 4 on the exam, 10 of them got a 3, 3 of them got a 2, and 2 of them got a 1. You could probably make an argument for any of the measures of central tendency here, like for either the mean, median, or mode. But I'm going to take this from a student perspective. Students are often interested in knowing how their grade compares to a class average. Because if their grade is higher than the class average, then they pat themselves on the back and tell themselves, good job. If their grade is lower than the class average, then that would be an indication to them that, okay, maybe I didn't prepare properly for this exam, or maybe I need to put a bit more work into understanding this specific learning outcome. So which measure of central tendency is all about an average? So if we're looking at our grade in comparison to a class average, which measure of central tendency involves calculating an average? That's the mean. So I'd say the mean is the best measure of central tendency in this situation. Okay, so let's justify this. So I'll say since students are often interested in knowing how their grade compares to a class average, the mean, because that's what an average is. An average is just the mean, is the best measure of central tendency. Okay. Now, from my perspective as a teacher, usually if I mark an exam and I look at a frequency chart like this, I'd probably be more interested in the mode. So, for example, if like this test was written and the mode score was a 2, that would tell me probably either that the test I wrote was too difficult, or that I need to approach that concept or concepts the quiz covered or the exam covered from a different point of view, or maybe from a different approach to see if I can like better teach it. But from a student perspective, in comparison to a class average, I'd say the mean is the best measure of central tendency. Second example, student walks down a hallway of a school and then just at random asks 9 people their age and records the following. So they get ages of 16, 53, 14, 16, 11, 11, 12, 13, and 11 years old. Part A, I want to determine the mean, median, and mode age. Because I want to figure out the median and the mode, we're going to take this data and reorganize it first in ascending order. So we start off with having 11 3 times. So I have 11, 11, 11. Then we have 12 once. Then we have 13 once. Then we have 14 once. Then we have 16 twice. So right, 16, 16. And then we have 53. Odds are the 53 is the student ran into a teacher. Okay, so let's get the mean, median, and the mode. So the mode's the easiest thing to see. The mode is the most frequently occurring number in a data set, so that would be 11. The median is the middle number in the data set, so let's go inward and figure out what that is. So we go in by 1, go in by 2, go in by 3, go in by 4, and we do have a direct center because we have an odd number in this data set, so my median would be equal to 13. The mean, we got to do a little bit of work to calculate this. So first things first, we have n equals 9. So that's the number of values in the data set. And let's figure out the sum. So the sum would be 11 plus 11 plus 11 plus 12 plus 13 plus 14 plus 16 plus 16 plus 53. Again, it's not totally necessary to put it in ascending order to get the sum, because it doesn't matter what order you add in. Okay, when I do this, I get a sum of 157. The mean, we can calculate using the equation. Mean is equal to the sum of all the values divided by n. The sum is 157. The number of values in the data set is 9. If I calculate this, it gives me a repeating decimal number of 17.444 ... And as in the case with a decimal number, generally we want to round this, and we're going to round it to the nearest, I'll round it to the nearest tenth of a decimal. So a tenth of a decimal is just the first decimal place. To determine how to round it, I got to look at the following digit in the hundreds position. If it's a value 044, we don't round at all. If it's 5 through 9, we round up. It's a 4, therefore we don't round. Therefore, this mean would then be 17.4 years. B says, is the mean or the median the better measure of central tendency? Okay, so I've removed the mode from the picture, although the mode probably is a good measure of central tendency as well. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to remove the outlier, and then we're going to recalculate the median and the mean. And then we want to see which of those two is least affected by the outlier. That will be the better measure of central tendency. Okay, so let's remove the outlier. So the outlier would be like the teacher's age. So remove the outlier, that's equal to 53. Okay, now let's go up to the top here and get rid of it. Okay, so my data set no longer has that number in it. Okay, let's figure out the median. So again, it didn't ask me to determine the mode. So let's go in by 1 each time. So go in by 1, go in by 2, go in by 3. And this time around, you actually have two middle numbers. You have a 12 and you have a 13. If you have two middle numbers, the median is just the midpoint of those two numbers. Your median, and to get the midpoint of two numbers is take the two numbers and add them. So that'd be 12 plus 13, and then just divide by 2. So that would give me a median. You really don't even need to do this calculation. The midpoint of 12 and 13 is 12 and a half. Okay, let's calculate the mean. Now to calculate the mean, we can, first of all, we have less data points. We've removed the outliers. We no longer have 9 data points. We have 8. To calculate the new sum, we can make use of the old sum. What's the difference between the new sum and the old sum? Get rid of the outlier. So your new sum would then be equal to the old one, which is 157. Subtract the outlier, which is 53. And that would give me a new sum that is 104. So the mean would then be equal to your new sum divided by the new n value. So the new sum would be 104 divided by n, which is 8. And this actually gives you a whole number. It gives you a whole number of 13. Okay, now let's compare. Let's see what happened. The median went from 13 to 12.5. That's a pretty small change. It's barely affected. The mean went from 17.4 to 13. That's quite a bit of a difference. That's off by like 4.4 years. So the better measure of central tendency would be the one that's least affected by the outlier. So which of these two is least affected by the outlier? Well, the median, because the median barely changed. So I can say the median is the better measure of central tendency compared to the mean anyways. Okay, the median is a better measure of central tendency compared to the mean because it is the least affected by the outlier. You could probably make an argument the mode is the best measure of central tendency because the mode, even when you remove the outlier, is still 11. So the outlier had absolutely no effect on the mode. Although for part B, I just gave the options of describing whether the mean or the median was a better measure of central tendency. But that's another way of determining which is the best measure of central tendency. Remove the outlier or outliers, and then figure out which of the mean, median, and mode has been least affected by that. Okay, so that's the conclusion of this lesson, and you can practice identifying best measures of central tendency by completing pages, or just page 450 in your MathLink 7 textbook, numbers 4 through 6. And I will talk to you in the next unit of study.